153 passengers were on a routine flight, settling into their seats, unaware that danger was quietly creeping through the cabin. The hum of the engines filled the air, conversations faded into whispers, and the flight seemed ordinary until something terrifying happened. Both pilots, entrusted with the lives of everyone on board, had mysteriously fallen asleep mid-flight. Panic didn't yet ripple through the passengers, but the situation was spiraling toward disaster. In row 22, a man who had spent decades testing some of the most advanced aircraft in the world noticed it first. A former test pilot. Yet alert, he realized the plane was drifting off course. He looked at the slumbering cockpit crew and felt a surge of responsibility. 153 lives now rested on his training and quick thinking. Around him, families chatted, children laughed, and nobody had any idea what was unfolding just meters away. Time was ticking, and the window to prevent catastrophe was closing fast. What would he do? Could he take control before it was too late? The ordinary flight had turned into a race against fate, and the answer rested in the hands of one man. But would he succeed before disaster struck? The former test pilot's eyes darted to the instruments, checking altitude, speed, and heading. Years of flying under extreme conditions flashed through his mind. Turbulence, engine failures, even mid-air emergencies, but nothing had ever felt like this. The cockpit was silent except for the faint snore of the pilots. He could see the uncertainty in the faces around him, the subtle unease in passengers shifting in their seats. But no one realized the severity of the danger looming above them. He remembered the rigorous training he had endured, the countless simulations where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. All that experience suddenly became real. He knew that taking action wasn't just an option, it was the only chance to prevent catastrophe. As he weighed his next move, memories of his own family flickered in his mind. His children, his parents, the thought of leaving them behind if he failed. The plane had already started a slight veer, and he could feel a growing tension in the cabin as the passengers unknowingly approached. What could become a disaster? Every second counted. One wrong move, and the consequences would be unimaginable. But what could a single man do, stuck in the middle of the plane, while 153 lives hung in the balance? He slowly stood up, trying not to draw attention, but the weight of the situation made every step feel heavier. The hum of the engines now seemed louder, almost threatening. From his seat, he could see the flight attendants moving down the aisle, unaware of the sleeping pilots. They were focused on routine safety checks, smiles on their faces, while the real danger loomed just a few feet away. Passengers continued chatting, some scrolling through their phones, others dozing off. No one realized that the plane had started to drift slightly off its intended path. The former test pilot's mind raced. He thought about the possibility of communicating with air traffic control, but reaching the cockpit without alarming the pilots was nearly impossible. And if they woke suddenly, disoriented, the situation could spiral even faster. He remembered stories of mid-air emergencies he had read about, the ones where every decision had to be perfect under pressure. Now, he was living one. Families laughed, children played with tiny headphones, and yet above them, the calm exterior of the cockpit hid a ticking clock counting down to disaster. As he moved closer, he caught snippets of conversations: a mother soothing her baby, a man joking about turbulence, and it hit him. 153 lives depended not just on skill, but on timing, courage, and the impossible choice he was about to make. Could he act before it was too late? His heart pounded as he reached the cockpit door, the reality of the moment pressing down on him like never before. Every instinct he had honed over decades screamed caution, yet every second wasted could edge the plane closer to disaster. He hesitated, hands trembling slightly, knowing that what he was about to do would either save 153 lives or turn a routine flight into tragedy. Inside the cabin, tension began to ripple subtly. A passenger glanced at the cockpit, frowning at the unusual quiet. A flight attendant paused mid-step, sensing something was off but unsure what. Meanwhile, the former test pilot scanned the controls through the small window, noting the slight drift in altitude and course, each flicker of the instruments signaling the narrow margin between safety and chaos. Memories of past emergencies flashed through him: engine failures, sudden turbulence, lives hanging in the balance, and now, all of it was real, unfolding before him. Sweat formed on his brow as he weighed his options: wake the pilots and risk panic, or take matters into his own hands and hope. His skills could match the gravity of the situation. The plane's gentle hum now felt like a countdown. Every movement, every breath, every second brought him closer to a moment that would define whether 153 people would walk away from this flight or not. The choice loomed, terrifying and inescapable, as the cabin held its quiet, unsuspecting tension. Just as he reached for the cockpit door handle, the plane jolted violently, sending drinks spilling and passengers gripping their armrests. The sudden turbulence wasn't on the weather report. Something else was wrong. Panic flickered in the eyes of those nearby, and whispers spread through the cabin as tension skyrocketed. His pulse raced. This was no ordinary emergency. Through the cockpit window, he saw one pilot stir slightly, mumbling incoherently, while the other remained unresponsive. he realized that waking them could trigger confusion or even a sudden overcorrection, worsening the situation. At the same time, the plane's instruments began flashing irregularly altitude warnings, navigation, alerts, signaling that the aircraft was veering dangerously close to restricted airspace. Then came another shock. From the back of the plane, a flight attendant appeared at the cockpit door, her expression tense, holding a tablet that showed the autopilot was malfunctioning. The systems they relied on to stabilize the flight were failing at the worst possible moment. Now, it wasn't just about waking the pilots or taking control, it was a race against failing technology, rising turbulence, and the weight of 153 lives depending on one man. Every choice felt more perilous than the last, and with every second, the stakes climbed higher. The calm flight had dissolved into a web of uncertainty and impending danger, and the former test pilot had no room for error. The former test pilot took a deep breath, steadying himself as the plane rocked again. With no time to hesitate, he forced the cockpit door open and slid into the co-pilot's seat, his hands already on the controls. The unresponsive pilot slumped against the side, and the other blinked groggily, still disoriented. He had seconds to act, and every calculation, every maneuver he had trained for, had to be precise. He engaged the autopilot manually, stabilizing the plane's altitude while keeping it on course. Alarms blared and the cabin trembled as turbulence hit, but gradually, control returned to the aircraft. Passengers, unaware of the full scope of the danger they had just skirted, clutched to each other, some realizing only through the pilot's calm voice over the intercom that they had been moments from disaster. Just as relief began to wash over him, a new warning flashed. One of the engines was failing. The autopilot held, but the plane now required a careful descent to the nearest airport. Using every ounce of skill and experience, he guided the aircraft down safely, wheels touching the runway with a controlled jolt. Passengers erupted in applause, tears streaming, hugs exchanged. But as he exhaled, leaning back in exhaustion, he noticed a small blinking device on the co-pilot's seat. Unknown signal still active. The crisis wasn't completely over. The emergency crews rushed to the plane as passengers began to disembark, faces pale but filled with relief. Families clung to each other, grateful for the courage of the man who had saved 153 lives. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. But the former test pilot quietly slipped down the aisle, allowing the heroes in uniform to take the spotlight. He didn't need recognition. What mattered was that everyone had made it safely. Later, investigators would discover the autopilot had malfunctioned due to a rare technical glitch, and both pilots had succumbed to extreme fatigue from a scheduling error. The small blinking device he had noticed turned out to be a warning sensor triggered by the system, a final reminder that even modern technology could fail, and human vigilance remained irreplaceable. Passengers would carry the memory of that flight forever, and airlines would revise safety protocols to prevent a repeat. The story of a single former test pilot in row 22 became a testament to calm under pressure, the power of skill, and the responsibility we carry for one another. As the plane emptied and the sun set behind the runway, he looked back one last time, a quiet smile on his face. 153 lives had been saved that day, but the lesson lingered. Courage often shows up when no one is watching.